Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to the September channel update. This was a slide of a month because it started off pretty well and then it just went whoosh. So let's go over it, shall we? Real life stuff first before we jump into the reading. Infertility hit me really hard this month, kind of out of nowhere. I've been doing this for literal years now, so I've kind of gotten decent expectations of what to expect, and it usually doesn't hit me super hard, but for whatever reason this month I got it into my head that like, oh, that's a symptom, it's happening, it's time. And when it ended up not being the case, it was a lot harder than usual. So I was near tears at work. That was fun. And I put the TBR challenge aside for a second and like just read whatever weird monster romances I wanted to kind of get back from that. And then on top of that, work started out well, but then we had to start, coming down harder with some rules and some IEP changes. So things are going to be a little bit more stressful than usual moving up before the behavioral changes and the IEP changes start having effect. Whenever you start a new thing, at first there's always a lot of pushback before it gets better. So I suspect that we'll have a decent amount of struggle for at least a hot minute moving forward. It's not horrible. There are still good parts of the job, and in general, it is still less stressful than last year, but it's just it's going to be a little bit more stressful than it was before. And then, of course, we have the story writing. At this point, I've basically given up the ghost story. That was a bad pun. Virtually every author or every agent that has responded to the query has rejected it. I'm still floored that they request the materials because of DB-PIT and they still give you a form rejection. Really? You asked for this, my guy. But regardless, I'm not going to continue querying that story. I mentioned in the last channel update that I don't know why I'm obsessively sticking to doing anything with traditional publishing when I hardly ever read traditionally published books. Like I think right now I am actually reading a hardback published within the last 3 years and I didn't even buy it. That is the most recent trad published thing that I own and I didn't even buy it. Like that's how little I do this. So my current plan is I actually want to write the full novel version of the short story that's coming out in October. In that story, it's only that it's like a little piece of a romance. It's the women realizing that they both have the same feelings for each other, followed by a sex scene that my mother is going to be reading. But I gave the captain this really cool backstory that I really, really want to focus on because she was a noblewoman that her husband tried to kill so he could marry a younger woman with a bigger dowry, and she becomes a pirate and basically goes out of her way to rob him blind. So I want to show that story, and it's going to be a little bit tricky. I have to do a lot of world building, but I get to come up with pirate slang. And obviously it's not a given that it's going to be published. But I am, once I'm done and it's edited everything, I'm going to query it to the publisher that published the short story collection. I'm really, really hoping that that short story collection has a decent amount of interest to show that it's a worthwhile concept, but I'm not sure. I might be pushing it a little bit more on my TikTok because I have over 6,000 followers on there. And in general, I'm basically just trying to pivot and finally put the trad publishing part of my author dreams to bed, accept myself for the indie weirdo that I am. And moving forward, October is going to be all about nano prep. It's going to be focusing a little bit more on the daily self-care and ways to de-stress. In general, it's just holding through, and I'm just hoping that we don't have a lot of big issues. My husband and I have actually talked about the fact that currently we don't necessarily feel lacking without kids. I think we finally have gotten out of the it feels like there's a giant hole in our lives aspect from when our last foster son left. So we are still getting calls, but we're really picky right now. And we have made plans that maybe we'll do IVF come New Year if we still don't have anything. Just in general, it was a weird month, but let's move on to something a little bit less depressing. What was my reading like? As usual, when my real life is getting really rocky, my reading does great. My record for most books read in a year is still 2020. So, I already beat my books for the year challenge of 100, and no, I am not going to up it. I know other people do when they beat it early, but I don't like feeling like I'm racing to the finish. I like having everything around the holidays just be extra, just be fun stuff, so that I don't feel pressured to be reading random short things just to read things. I got a lot of really long books on my list I want to get to, so having it already over the amount and seeing, goal completed helps lessen that I must up the number. Still, I think I could easily be like 140 books this year, depending on if I let myself binge read all of the monster romances that I want to. It's a possibility. But anyway, review books, I actually did fairly well in the month of September. I put out 7 review videos. The catch is, though, is that the more reviews I put out, the more attention I catch from indie authors who see me as an indie reviewer, and I get more requests. So I still have 7 books on my review list and 2 more requests waiting for replies. And yes, I have learned to be like, hey, not a yes or a no. I gotta get some other books off my list. This is a placeholder. I will get back to you. And thankfully, so far, every author that I have had to say that to has accepted it. So I do think I will continue with the review books being part of my TBR challenge, even though right now I only have 1 slot open and 2 review requests. And so I don't trust myself to say yes or no to either of them because I don't want to feel say yes to one and then automatically have to say no to the other because I feel pressured not to have it on. It's a whole thing. But I feel like I could do a decent amount of review books in October, although again, I've had this idea in my head for a reading vlog. Basically how many monster romance books can I read in 3 days, because we have a long weekend in October from school. So I'm I want to do a super monster romance weekend that weekend. And in general, like I mentioned before, when things get rocky, I start leaning a lot more on my reading. But the problem is that because I'm in this new obsessive monster romance, let's call it an era, I have an entire list of books to get. But again, I can't get them until I have more slots on my TBR challenge. So I've been unhauling a lot. So much. To my credit, I will defend myself in this much. I did actually try reading ebooks before I unhauled them, but it just got to the point where if I just wasn't liking the writing style within the first X amount of pages, I gave up on it. And I would highly suggest other people start doing this too. Learn to DNF very soon in a book, because with the new refund policy being set through by Amazon, you can only return a book easily if you have read less than 10%. Anything over 10%, it's a much more complicated process. And I know everyone's like, you can still do it, but also I don't necessarily trust Amazon's customer service in relation to their ebooks. As someone that has tried to get review bans repealed before, I don't have the best faith in them. So my advice to you, if you're an avid ebook reviewer, is get really good at making a judgment call within a very tiny frame, and decide whether or not you want to continue. Definitely read the excerpts. Always read the excerpts in the front few pages before you buy. That has saved me more than once. But the challenge continues to go well-ish. I am getting to the point where I keep going through the same ebooks to see if I want to unhaul, and I'm not sure. And I might have to go to my, I'm looking at them here, my physical copies, because I have a lot of these books that I got for super cheap from secondhand bookstores just because I wanted to buy something from a bookstore, because I always want to buy something when I go to a bookstore, and I'm like, do I really still want that? It's going to be more annoying because unhauling physical books is always more annoying than unhauling ebooks. But I think if I do this, if I go through, I could easily knock off another 20 books. I really don't know what I was thinking with some of these books. Regardless, things continue to hold fairly steady. I don't plan on doing any other readathons until December. I technically joined this, not really a readathon, like more like a guided TBR challenge, because it's only 6 books taking place over 2 months. That's not a readathon at all. But even that, I'm like iffy about, because my brain needs the pure serotonin of loving what I'm reading. So probably won't do that. But regardless, I think things can turn around at least a little bit for me in October. Obviously, I have no control over the weird fuckery my body is doing, but I am going to start prepping for Nano, and it's going to be a lot of fun world building, because it's going to be a bunch of piratey stuff, but it's not going to be like, it's going to be based on the golden age of piracy, but it's not going to actually be the Caribbean and all of those like straight up cultures. It's going to be more world building stuff, because it technically takes place in a world where magic exists, even if the protagonists like aren't steeped in it themselves, and I get to come up with pirate slang and do like research on pirates. So Preptober is going to be pretty fun just from that aspect. And I've kind of again been diving into my interests as a result of all the not funness. So a lot of crocheting while watching Critical Role. I finally got into campaign 3, only a couple episodes in, because dear God, they're so long. It takes me like 3 days just to be able to finish one episode after work. But I know I'll be okay. I know I'll come back from all of this. It was just one of those things where it was like everything was kind of taking a turn for the worse at the same time. And it'll take me a hot minute. I don't necessarily bounce back as fast as I used to when I was, early on in this job, early on in the infertility stuff, early on in all of this. But I will, eventually. So thank you so much for listening to my ramblings. I really wish these could be more uplifting than they actually are. They seem to be a lot more somber than I hoped for. But you've been watching anyways if you're hearing this part, so thank you so much. Be sure to let me know if you have any monster romance recommendations. Odds are I have probably either read it or have it on my list, but just in case, give them to me anyway. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.